For just a moment, imagine sitting on a city train during a routine commute. There are other passengers nearby, the familiar hum of steel on rails, the quiet expectation that public space means shared safety. Then imagine that sense of normalcy collapsing in seconds as a stranger launches a brutal attack, beating another passenger so severely that he ends up unconscious, hospitalized for weeks, and fighting to recover basic functions. Now imagine learning that the man responsible walks free, never serving time in a prison cell. That outcome is not hypothetical. It is the real conclusion of a case now stirring intense debate in Chicago and far beyond. The case centers on a violent assault that took place aboard a Chicago Transit Authority Pink Line train, an environment that by design places strangers in close proximity with little ability to escape once danger emerges. According to reporting, the incident occurred in April 2025 when a confrontation between two men escalated into a savage physical attack. Surveillance footage captured the moment when the accused, identified as Jesus Ramirez, struck another passenger repeatedly, delivering blows to the head and body with alarming force. The two men were not known to each other. There was no prior dispute, no ongoing feud, and no meaningful warning that violence was imminent. What unfolded was sudden, intense, and devastating. The victim, a 37-year-old man, suffered injuries that medical professionals described as severe and life-altering. He sustained a traumatic brain injury, internal bleeding in the brain, broken ribs, fractures to facial bones, damage to his ear, and a fractured temporal bone. He was placed in a medically induced coma and remained hospitalized for roughly 2 months. For weeks, his survival was uncertain. Even after being discharged, recovery from injuries of that magnitude typically involves long-term physical, neurological, and psychological challenges. These are not wounds that simply heal with time. They reshape lives. Chicago police released surveillance images in the aftermath of the attack, seeking public assistance in identifying the suspect. Ramirez was eventually arrested and charged with aggravated battery causing great bodily harm, a felony offense under Illinois law that reflects the seriousness of the injuries inflicted. From the outset, the case appeared straightforward in one key respect. The attack was captured on video, the injuries were well documented, and the charge itself carried the potential for significant incarceration. Yet when the legal process concluded, the outcome shocked many observers. Ramirez pleaded guilty, but the sentence imposed did not result in prison time. Instead, the court credited him for more than a year spent on electronic monitoring prior to sentencing. Under Illinois statutes, that time counted toward his sentence. Additional statutory reductions further shortened the effective term. By the time all credits were applied, Ramirez had satisfied the sentence without entering a correctional facility. He walked free. This outcome has ignited fierce debate not only because of the brutality of the attack, but because of what it appears to signal about accountability for severe violence in public spaces. For many members of the public, the idea that an individual could nearly kill a stranger on a train and face no traditional incarceration feels fundamentally unjust. It clashes with intuitive notions of proportional punishment and raises unsettling questions about deterrence, safety, and trust in the justice system. To understand how such an outcome occurred, it is necessary to examine the legal framework that governs sentencing in Illinois. Like many states, Illinois allows defendants to receive credit for time spent in custody or under court-ordered supervision prior to sentencing. Electronic monitoring, while not equivalent to incarceration, is considered a form of restraint on liberty and therefore eligible for credit. In addition, Illinois law includes provisions that reduce sentences based on statutory guidelines, behavior, and eligibility criteria. These mechanisms are designed to manage prison populations, encourage compliance, and promote rehabilitation where appropriate. From a purely legal standpoint, the court acted within the bounds of existing law. Judges and prosecutors do not create statutes. They apply them. The sentence Ramirez received reflects how the system currently functions, not an extraordinary deviation from established rules. However, legality does not always equate to legitimacy in the eyes of the public. The gulf between what the law permits and what citizens believe is morally appropriate can erode confidence in institutions meant to deliver justice. Public reaction to the case has been swift and emotionally charged. Online forums, social media platforms, and local discussions have filled with expressions of disbelief and anger. Many commenters emphasize the severity of the victim's injuries, arguing that electronic monitoring is grossly insufficient as punishment for an act that could easily have resulted in death. Some describe the sentence as an invitation to lawlessness, suggesting that lenient consequences embolden future attackers rather than discouraging them. Others, while acknowledging the horror of the assault, caution against oversimplifying complex legal systems. They argue that sentencing frameworks exist for a reason and that emotional reactions should not override structured legal principles. From this perspective, the problem lies not with the court's decision in this particular case, but with the broader statutory framework. If society believes that such outcomes are unacceptable, the remedy must come from legislative reform rather than judicial discretion alone. The case also brings renewed attention to safety on public transportation, an issue of growing concern in major cities across the United States. While millions of rides occur safely every day, high-profile incidents of violence have an outsized impact on public perception. Transit systems rely on a basic social contract. Riders trust that shared spaces will be reasonably secure and that when serious harm occurs, the justice system will respond decisively. When that trust is shaken, the consequences extend beyond a single case. Riders may feel anxious or unsafe, particularly during off-peak hours. Transit workers face increased stress. City officials confront mounting pressure to address both real and perceived risks. A single case can thus ripple outward, influencing behavior, policy debates, and public discourse far beyond the courtroom. At the center of these discussions, however, is the victim. It is easy for legal arguments and policy debates to overshadow the human cost of violent crime. A traumatic brain injury can impair memory, concentration, emotional regulation, and the ability to work or maintain relationships. Physical injuries may limit mobility or cause chronic pain. Psychological trauma can linger long after visible wounds have healed. For survivors, justice is not an abstract concept. It is deeply personal, bound up with healing, closure, and the acknowledgement of harm suffered. The absence of prison time in this case may feel, to the victim and his supporters, like a denial of that acknowledgement. Even if the legal reasoning is sound, the emotional reality is far more complex. Justice systems do not operate in a vacuum. They exist to serve communities and individuals whose lives are directly affected by their decisions. This case also intersects with broader debates about criminal justice reform. Over the past decade, many jurisdictions have sought to reduce reliance on incarceration, emphasizing alternatives such as supervision, monitoring, and rehabilitation. Advocates argue that mass incarceration has failed to deliver safer communities and has imposed enormous social and economic costs. Critics counter that reforms have sometimes swung too far, particularly in cases involving severe violence. The challenge lies in distinguishing between offenders who pose an ongoing risk and those for whom rehabilitation outside prison is appropriate. A nearly fatal assault on a stranger in a public space tests the limits of that distinction. It forces policymakers and citizens alike to confront difficult questions about how far reform should go and where firm boundaries must be drawn. Comparisons to other transit-related attacks only intensify the debate. When incidents involving extreme harm occur in confined public spaces, they often become symbols of larger societal anxieties. They prompt calls for increased security, stricter sentencing, and clearer consequences for violent behavior. Whether those calls translate into lasting policy change depends on political will, public pressure, and the capacity of institutions to adapt. In Chicago, a city long accustomed to national scrutiny over crime and justice, this case fits into an ongoing narrative about accountability, reform, and public safety. It highlights tensions between progressive legal frameworks and traditional expectations of punishment. It exposes the gap between legal outcomes and public sentiment, and it underscores the difficulty of crafting a system that is both humane and resolute in the face of severe harm. Ultimately, the question raised by this case is not simply whether the sentence was legal. It is whether the outcome aligns with society's understanding of justice. When a person is beaten nearly to death on a train, many instinctively believe that incarceration is a necessary response, both to acknowledge the gravity of the harm and to deter future acts. When that response does not occur, trust in the system is strained. This case will likely continue to be cited in debates over sentencing laws, electronic monitoring, and public safety. It may inspire calls for legislative change or serve as a cautionary example in discussions about reform reform. Regardless of the policy outcomes, it stands as a stark reminder that behind every statute and sentence are real people, real injuries, and real consequences. In the end, justice is not measured only by compliance with the law, but by the confidence it inspires in those it is meant to protect. Whether this case strengthens or weakens that confidence is a question that Chicago and perhaps the nation will continue to grapple with long after the train has left the station.